Hey folks, well, it's been 2 weeks since I dropped my first video on Ukraine, where I gave it a 60% chance that Putin was going to invade. I'd like to go ahead and adjust my prediction and say that there is a 100% chance that Putin is going to invade. So obviously, that's where we are now. And I thought it would be good to revisit a little bit about what's happened, what we were thinking might happen, originally, I wanted to start talking about the future of NATO, and I still really want to get to that. But because this thing did go hot, I thought it would be interesting to get our thoughts down about how that turned out. I think the first thing I want to talk about is what I definitely got wrong. I thought that this would definitely be an invasion in the east. I thought that the Donbass region was a no-brainer, that they would absolutely go in. From there, I thought that they would try to create a land bridge all the way to Crimea, and that in a best case scenario for the Russians, they would be able to grab Odessa. So basically, from Kharkiv down to Odessa, they'd have a basically that line, and they would get everything on the southeast side of that, and Ukraine would be much smaller, being on the northwest side. So I originally didn't think that they would be attacking in the north. I didn't think that they would be going after Kiev directly. I know that my dear friend T. Fitch mentioned that, well, what's the end result then if they just have a smaller Ukraine? They still have basically NATO right next door, and I think that that's definitely part of the calculus here. But on the other hand, one of the other reasons why I didn't think that they would come in through the north was for fear of underperformance. I thought that the Russian army might not look as good as the Russians think that it is. That, especially with the Javelin missiles as an example, the defense of the city was going to really bleed the Russians if the Ukrainians could stand and put up a fight. And I think that's definitely playing out. I think that if Putin had it to go over again, he'd come over and talk to me and say, yeah, I think you're right. We'll take the the southeastern half. They didn't do it, and right now they are definitely paying a price. And I know there's a lot of talk going on about the success of the Ukrainian defense, and I'm as guilty of it as anybody else. And for me, a lot of it was because I was a little bit surprised. I was worried, I was afraid that they were going to essentially melt like a lot of the other forces. Like, for example, Iraq. When we went into Iraq, if you recall, during the first Gulf War, Saddam had what was it, the third or fourth largest army in the world. But then they didn't put up that resistance. They fell apart and quickly dissolved both times we went into Iraq, and then you ended up with insurgent fighting. And I think we'll still probably get there in Ukraine, but I guess we'll get to that a little bit down the road. The second thing that I wanted to talk about was the use of the naval infantry. Now, this one I'm pretty happy with. I thought that they would definitely try to land along the coast of the Sea of Azov, and they have done that. They landed south of Mariupol, and they're using that to basically split up the Ukrainian defenders to help secure the city of Mariupol. So I thought that was a pretty good prediction on my side. Again, and this one actually was in a conversation that I had with the aforementioned T. Fitch, where I basically suggested I don't think they're going to go after Odessa. I don't think they're even going to feint on Odessa. Now, that is a question that is open right now. We don't exactly know what's happening. I've seen several reports that troops were landed on Odessa, but I've never seen any confirmation. It's basically just tweets that show up. I did see a U.S. Naval Institute article that expressly discussed the Mariupol landings and mentioned that there had been some activity in Odessa, but nothing with regard to an actual amphibious landing. Now, the question is why? From my perspective, the reason that they wouldn't was much like the underperformance issue up north, and that is they couldn't afford to lose one of their large landing ships. Maybe that's not really a risk. Ukraine doesn't exactly have a stockpile of anti-ship missiles. In fact, I think that even when their fleet was at its most ready, they had two, and that's assuming they didn't have any reloads. So so maybe it isn't as risky as I was thinking it was, but there's still that question of underperformance. So that was my rationale for why they wouldn't do it. But some of the reporting that's come out has been really sketchy all the way down. I've seen some articles mentioning uh, essentially almost mutinies on the ships as they're coming in. Now that to me does not ring true. I How on earth would that story get out? Uh, Seems a little sketchy to me. What did the sailor or marine send a text message out? Said, "Oh, hey, mom, we're mutinying again." It just it didn't quite ring true. That's one thing we're seeing so many stories that come out that do turn out to be completely made up, like the Snake Island 13. That was a great story. The Ghost of Kiev, great story. Yeah, not true, but pretty cool. And so I'm wondering if that isn't kind of what we're looking at when it comes to potential mutinies on Russian landing ships. Um, so we'll just keep an eye on that. I suspect that if they do make a move on Odessa with land-based forces, that they will probably try to open a second front using the naval infantry, but that's not going to. I don't think that's going to be anytime soon. Um, so that's kind of my scorecard on how I thought things might go and how they are going. And I think the question. Oh, actually, there's one more thing. I didn't discuss this, but it is a really interesting question to me, and that is, where is the Air Force? I really thought that the West made the playbook for this kind of thing. That the first thing that Russians would do is come in and establish air dominance, launch some seed missions. That's suppression of enemy air defenses. Take out the SAM systems. The Ukrainians have S-300s, which they're not state of the art anymore, but they'll put a hole in your airplane nonetheless. So when they didn't open with that, I was really confused, and I can't remember if it was the drive or what source it was, but I did. I'll post an article in the comments that talked about possible reasons, and the one that I thought was most interesting was the use of Russian air defense missiles, their mobile SAM systems that travel with the armored forces. If they're driving around with those, they really do worry about red on red. We usually call it blue on blue, but red on red shoot downs. A fear that those SAM systems would look up and see incoming aircraft, and one, you can't really count on visuals. There's a lot of cross pollination between airframes, and two, just the fog of war. This is a problem that goes back as far back as the first time you had an aerial engagement. I'm sure, um, long before missiles even. But with the missiles, it increases the risk. And so the concern by the Russians might be that flying their own aircraft over their own battlefields would lead to shoot downs from their own SAM systems. To me, it still is a little boggling. And again, I thought the West had really established this as sort of modern doctrine, and I don't see why you would challenge that. And that would be, well, you send your airplanes in first, you establish air dominance first, and once you've done that, once you've destroyed the enemy SAM systems, once you've shot up the enemy's air force, then maybe you can slack off and you bring your mobile SAMs in and get your air defense coverage that way. But I think that this is going to be a question that we're not going to have a good answer. Uh, we're not going to have a good answer to that question until after this whole thing is over. Yeah, it'll be the after action reports. It'll be the write ups in history that might explain that. We'll see. I'll definitely keep an eye out. So what comes next? That's really the question, and I think we're already seeing it with the massive reinforcements. I know that there have been some essentially defections or some surrender on the part of the Russians. I think that much like with the reports of mutinies, I think that some of that is a little overhyped. And sure, I guarantee you that there are deserters. I'm sure there are. I just don't know if it's going to be something en masse. But that is definitely what the Twitterverse is hyping up. So I don't think that the Russians are just going to quit. Instead, I think that they are just going to bring in what the Red Army does the best, which is massive amounts of artillery and lots of people. And they will bombard the hell out of Ukrainian cities until they can achieve a surrender. I think that that's clearly what's already starting in our time today. That's the 1st of March. We were getting reports of pretty heavy bombardments in Kharkiv and in Kiev itself. Um, so we'll see, but that definitely it definitely seems like they're going to lay a siege on some of these cities until they can get it broken up. In fact, I actually did think I saw something that Mariupol might have even it was either on the verge or already had fallen to Russian troops. So that should be the least surprising. That was that's a southern port city that's right outside or right on the edge of that Donbass region. So if they were going to get a big population center, that was probably going to be the first one. But I think we're going to see that repeat in some of these other ones. And for as much and as valiant as the Ukrainian defense has been, there are just more Russians. There's always more Russians. Um, and so I think that they're going to they're going to stay and they're going to fight, but at the end of the day, they're going to get ground down. And the question is, how steep of a price can they make the Russians pay for those cities? And so far, it's looking like the Russians are going to pay dearly. Obviously, so will the Ukrainians. This is a a bad outcome for everybody. The only other thing that concerns me going forward is, of course, for a Cold War kid like me, the nuclear risk. It's not surprising that Putin elevated his readiness levels. I'm glad that so far we on America or NATO we're not following suit. We're not increasing our readiness, or at least it's not being reported. And I think that's the right move. I think that trying to keep this contained as best we can is definitely the right move. And for people who might be thinking that I'm exposing us, I really don't think that I am. I think that our second strike capability via our sub-launch ballistic missiles, via our nuclear bomber force, I just I feel like we have enough of a deterrent there that we don't need to raise our first strike readiness. We can rely on the other two parts of the triad that we have. That's why we have them, for crying out loud. I don't I don't think that we're going to see a nuclear detonation in the Ukraine. I think it's possible. I think that from a Western view, it's easy to say, oh, it's impossible. Nobody's that crazy. And I think that part of that problem is the cultural way that we look at nuclear weapons compared to how some in the East, especially the Russians, look at the use of nuclear weapons. For us, and I don't know the exact history of our tactics, but culturally, we've definitely looked at nuclear weapons, and I'm just kind of speaking on behalf of all of us, which is probably inappropriate, but we've collectively come to the conclusion that once you open up the genie, you're not going to get it back in the bottle, and that the use of tactical nuclear weapons will almost inevitably increase to the use of strategic nuclear weapons and the end of the world. I mean, how many of the popular culture experiences did we have in the 80s that did that? I'm thinking of The Day After or the movie Threads. Lots of the books at the time. you didn't usually start with a massive exchange. There was usually that that one tactical nuke or uh, the one warning nuke where they drop one over the uh, over the White Sea and just say, hey, guess what? We do have nuclear weapons. Don't forget. And so we tend to forget that for other cultures, the tactical nuclear weapons don't necessarily lead to strategic nuclear weapons. And so I can absolutely see a possibility where if these battles aren't going the way that the Russians need them to, that a low yield nuclear weapon would be detonated in Ukraine. And the question that we have to start asking ourselves is, well, what does that mean? What does that mean for us? What's the proper response to that? And I don't have an answer for that question because of the aforementioned cultural belief that if we respond to that, that's going to be pushing towards a strategic escalation. And so that's something that I think we all need to dust off our thinking and get comfortable with because those are uncomfortable questions and they don't have any good answers, but we need to be ready to answer them. So uh, I hate to be such a downer on that. And then maybe hopefully I'm not being a downer because I'm not sure that the use of a tactical nuke will inevitably lead to a strategic exchange. I think that there must be ways that it could be handled that would prevent that outcome. But hopefully we never have to find out. But we should just be ready with something. And most importantly, I do want to stress I don't think that if there's any scenario that would lead to a direct strategic exchange without any nuclear escalation beforehand. I think that we will definitely, if it's going to go south, it's going to go south on the battlefield first, and then we have to really start worrying about what's gonna come second. So don't worry about that meme that says you're flipping through World War III memes and you wonder why the sun is rising at 9 o'clock at night. It's not going to get to that right away, I wouldn't think. But anyway, so I just wanted to kind of catch up, and I will definitely start working on something about the future of NATO. I know I got some unpopular hot sports opinions about that, so I will do my best to justify those opinions, and hopefully you guys find that interesting. I do want to thank you if you've made it this far into the video, and I'll talk to you soon.